It begins with a simple sentence you've said 1,000 times. I'm sorry. Even when the rain ruins your plans, even when someone else forgets, even when the world shifts in a way you absolutely could not control, these words come out of your mouth before you've had time to think. I'm sorry becomes your reflex, your shield, your way of making peace with a world that once taught you that your existence was the problem. And somewhere deep inside you, beneath all the apologies you've memorized, there is a child who learned that taking the blame was the only way to stop the chaos, to dissolve the anger, to finally be safe. This speaks of the psychology of people who carry guilt that was never theirs. Those who apologize for breathing too loudly, for needing too much, for simply being human. And if you've ever felt your chest tighten when someone is upset, even when logic tells you it's not your fault, this is for you. Because the weight you carry didn't come overnight, and understanding where it comes from could be the first step to finally putting it down. When you're young, your world is small and absolute. You don't have the cognitive framework to understand that adults have their own wounds, their own limits, their own storms. So when anger fills the house, when voices rise, when doors slam, your developing brain does something both brilliant and heartbreaking. It creates a story that makes sense of the chaos. And often, that story is this: it's me who caused this. If I had been calmer, better, different, none of this would have happened. This belief doesn't form because you are broken or too sensitive. It forms because children are creatures who create meaning, and when the world seems unpredictable, they will find any pattern, even painful, to create the illusion of control. Psychologists call this magical thinking, the child's belief that their thoughts, feelings, or behaviors directly cause external events. But when you grow up in an environment where emotional regulation is inconsistent, where love seems conditional, where someone's mood can change without warning, magical thinking becomes something more insidious. It becomes your survival strategy. Because if you cause the problem, then maybe you can fix it. If your behavior is the variable, then you have power. And so you become hyper-vigilant, always alert for signs of displeasure, constantly adjusting to become smaller, quieter, more agreeable. You learn that taking the blame stops conflict faster than defending yourself ever could. The truth is, children will do almost anything to preserve their attachment to the people who care for them. Their survival depends on it. So faced with the choice between believing their parent is unsafe or believing that they themselves are the problem, most children choose the second option. They internalize the dysfunction as a personal flaw rather than risk losing their main source of security. And this internalization becomes the foundation of chronic self-blame, a belief system so deeply rooted that it continues long after childhood ends, long after the original danger has passed. Think about that exact moment in your childhood. Maybe you were 8 years old, sitting on the couch, knees pulled up to your chest. Your mother was crying in the kitchen, your father was yelling on the phone, and you, fragile little human, thought if only I were better at school, if only I made less noise, if only I were different, they would be happy. That moment, that thought, carved itself into your psyche as a fundamental truth. Not because it was true, but because your child's brain could not understand that their problems existed independently of you. So you created an equation, me equals problem, and that equation still rules your life today. Fast forward to adulthood, and the pattern persists with troubling precision. You're in a relationship where someone forgets your birthday, and your first thought isn't anger or disappointment. It's what did I do for them to forget? Have I been too demanding lately? Have I talked too much about myself? Have I stopped being interesting? Your mind runs through an endless list of your perceived flaws, desperately searching for why you didn't deserve to be remembered. A colleague snaps at you during a meeting, and instead of recognizing their stress or lack of professionalism, you replay every interaction from the last 3 weeks, searching for your mistake, your slip-up, the proof that you triggered their irritation. Someone you love is unhappy, and their unhappiness feels like a direct accusation, like living proof that you aren't enough, that you disappointed them in some fundamental way you can't even identify. These are not conscious thoughts. These aren't logical conclusions reached after careful reflection. They are reflexes, automatic responses etched into your nervous system through years and years of conditioning. Your body has learned that when someone is upset, your survival depends on taking responsibility, even when that responsibility isn't yours, especially when that responsibility isn't yours. Because taking the blame as painful as it is, creates a sense of control that uncertainty never would. The psychology behind this is both simple and deeply complex. On the surface, taking the blame seems like humility. It looks like being a good person who acknowledges their flaws and takes responsibility. Others see you as mature, as someone who never makes a scene, who never passes the fault. But beneath that surface hides something much more painful. A deeply rooted belief that you are fundamentally responsible for other people's emotions, that their pain is somehow your creation, that their happiness depends on your ability to be perfect. That love is something you have to earn through impeccable behavior rather than something you simply deserve by existing. This belief system has a name in psychology: hyper-responsibility, and it is one of the most exhausting, painful ways to move through the world, because it means you are constantly on trial in your own mind, always proving your worth, defending your right to exist, apologizing for the crime of being human and thus imperfect. Your inner judge never sleeps, never takes a break, never grants you the benefit of the doubt. It scrutinizes every word you say, every action you take, every emotion you feel, searching for proof that you have failed someone in some way. What makes this pattern so insidiously difficult to break is that it's often completely invisible to others. In the eyes of the world, you seem pleasant, easygoing, even exceptionally mature. People might describe you as someone who never causes trouble, who is always ready to compromise, who never complains. Your friends may admire your ability to stay calm in conflicts. Your colleagues appreciate that you are always the first to admit your faults. Your partner loves you because you are so easygoing, so undemanding, so understanding of their needs. But no one sees the cost. No one sees how you stay awake until 3 a.m, replaying a conversation over and over, dissecting every word you said, looking for the exact moment when you said the wrong thing. No one sees the exhaustion of carrying everyone's disappointment as if it were your own, of managing the emotions of every person in your life while completely neglecting your own. No one sees the quiet but constant erosion of self-confidence that happens when you've spent so long doubting your own perspective, questioning your own reality, that you no longer even know what you truly feel versus what you think you ought to feel. There is a fascinating concept in social psychology called the fundamental attribution error. It is the universal human tendency to attribute others' behavior to their character, to who they fundamentally are, while attributing our own behavior to circumstances, context, or external factors. Someone cuts in line, they are selfish. You cut in line, you were late for an important reason. It's a cognitive bias we all have, a way to protect ourselves from the harsh judgment we easily apply to others. But people who chronically take on blame completely reverse this natural pattern. They attribute others' behavior to circumstances, or even worse, to their own failures, while seeing their own actions through the harshest, most merciless lens possible. Someone is rude to you, they must be having a bad day, and anyway, you probably did something to trigger that reaction. Your boss is in a bad mood, you surely disappointed them somehow. A friend cancels plans last minute, you probably weren't interesting enough for them to really want to spend time with you. You're having a bad day. Well, you should be stronger, more resilient, less affected by the small things. This double standard is relentless and destructive. It leaves you perpetually at fault, perpetually insufficient, perpetually sorry for existing in a way that absolutely no one else finds inconvenient except yourself. It's like living with an inner critic who has impossible standards for you, but infinite excuses for everyone around you. And the most tragic part is that you think this is kindness, that it's compassion, but it's not. It's self-annihilation disguised as virtue. And here's what is truly devastating about this psychological pattern. It doesn't just affect how you see yourself in the privacy of your own mind. It deeply affects the kind of relationships you attract, maintain, and allow into your life. Because when you signal to the world, consciously or not, that you will gladly absorb blame that isn't yours, you inadvertently invite people who are all too willing to give it to you. Not always consciously, not always maliciously, but the dynamic nevertheless establishes itself with troubling predictability. You become the emotional repository for others' discomfort, the person who absorbs the anxiety in the room, the one who smooths things over, who eliminates friction, who makes conflicts disappear by making themselves smaller, more accommodating, more invisible. And while this can create temporary peace, superficial harmony, it's the kind of peace that costs you your voice, your boundaries, your fundamental sense of self. It is the piece of erasure. An erasure, as quiet as it may seem, is a form of violence you commit against yourself again and again until you no longer recognize yourself. But let's go even deeper, because simply understanding the mechanism of this pattern is not enough to break it. You have to understand the why beneath the why. You need to understand what psychological function this pattern serves, what it protects you from, why a part of you clings so tightly to this pattern, even when you intellectually know that it is destroying you. Because here is the uncomfortable truth. As painful as chronic self-blame is, as exhausting as it can be, it serves a crucial psychological function in your emotional economy. It creates the illusion of control in a world that often seems chaotic, unpredictable, terrifying. If you are to blame, if it's your fault, then you have agency, power. If you caused the problem, then logically you should be able to fix it. There is something you can do, something you can change to make things better. But if the truth is that other people's emotions are complex, that they have their own stories, their own wounds, their own patterns that have nothing to do with you, then you have to sit with a much more uncomfortable, much scarier reality: total helplessness. The terrifying idea that sometimes things fall apart despite your best efforts. That love can leave even when you've done everything right. That you can't control how others feel, think, or act, no matter how hard you try to be perfect. And for someone who learned very early in childhood that their worth was directly tied to their ability to manage the emotional chaos of others, this helplessness feels like death itself. It feels like annihilation. Because if you can't fix things, if you can't control the outcomes, then who are you? What is your worth? Why should you be kept, loved, allowed to stay? These existential questions rise from the depths of your psyche, and the excuse becomes a talisman against them. A way to maintain the feeling that you have worth, even if that worth is built on the quicksand of self-erasure. So the excuse becomes much more than just a word. It becomes a ritual, almost sacred in its repetition. A way of saying to the universe, to every person you meet, please don't leave. Please don't be angry with me. Please don't see me as bad or defective or unworthy. I acknowledge my fault. I take responsibility. I promise to do better. Just don't leave me alone. It's not really about the specific transgression of the moment. It's not really about the spilled glass or the unsent text or the tone that may not have been perfect. It's about maintaining connection at any cost. And the price, accumulated over time, is astronomical. Because every time you apologize for something that isn't your fault, you teach your nervous system a devastating lesson. You teach it that your needs are inherently problematic, that your emotions are a burden, that your very existence requires constant justification, perpetual negotiation. You teach every cell in your body that love is something you have to crawl for, beg for, humble yourself over, rather than something you simply deserve because you are a human being who breathes, who feels, who exists. There is a deep existential loneliness in this way of living, a loneliness that few people understand because it does not look like traditional loneliness. You can be in a room full of people, surrounded by friends and family, in a long and stable relationship and still feel fundamentally, terribly alone, because no one really knows you. How could they when you have learned to hide, to bury, to suppress the parts of yourself that might be too much, too complicated, too demanding, too human? You have learned that to be loved, you must be easy. And being easy means carrying everyone else's discomfort, absorbing their anxiety, managing their emotions so that they never have to feel anything difficult in your presence. But here's what they never told you. True intimacy cannot exist in this dynamic. It simply cannot. True intimacy requires the freedom to be messy, imperfect, contradictory. It requires the ability to be wrong sometimes, to feel irrational things, to have needs that are not always practical or timely. It requires the trust that you can show all your parts, even the less flattering, even the most vulnerable, without fearing immediate abandonment. And if you have never had that freedom, if you have never had that space, you might not even know what you're missing. You just know that something essential seems absent in every connection, that even in your closest relationships, there is a distance, an invisible glass you just can't quite get through. Healing, when it finally starts to come, and it always comes if you are willing to do the work, does not arrive as a sudden and spectacular revelation. It does not come with fireworks or instant transformation. It comes as a series of small acknowledgements, micro-awakenings, often uncomfortable, sometimes painful. It begins when you notice the apology before it leaves your mouth. When you feel the words "I'm sorry" forming and you pause just a moment, just a second, to ask yourself, is this really mine to bear? Did I really do something wrong here? Or am I taking on responsibility out of habit, out of fear, out of that deeply rooted old pattern? Healing continues when you allow yourself to feel something that you may have suppressed for years. Anger. Not explosive, uncontrollable rage, but clear, clean, justified anger. Anger at the pattern itself. Anger at the years you spent carrying a weight that was never yours. Anger at the people who taught you that your worth depended on your ability to absorb their dysfunction. This anger is not destructive. It is enlightening. It tells you what matters, what deserves protection, where your boundaries should be. Healing deepens when you begin to practice something that seems almost impossible at first, that goes against every instinct you have developed, letting other people sit with their own discomfort, without rushing in to fix it. Without absorbing it into your own body, without making their emotion something that concerns you, something you must manage. Just letting them have their feelings, go through their processes, exist in their own experience while you exist in yours. This separation, this ability to maintain your own emotional space while being present for someone else, is the essence of healthy boundaries, and it is revolutionary for someone who has spent their entire life entangled with others' emotions. This is where the real work begins, because unlearning a survival pattern, a pattern that literally kept you safe during childhood, means facing directly the fear that this pattern was protecting you from living. It means risking conflict instead of instantly smoothing it over. Risking disappointment instead of preventing it through preemptive perfection. Risking the real and terrifying possibility that if you stop apologizing for everything, if you stop being so easy, if you stop absorbing all responsibility, some people might actually leave. And I won't lie to you, some people will leave. The people who benefited from your self-erasure, who relied on your willingness to be the problem, who got used to a version of you that mainly exists for their comfort, they might not know how to relate to you when you no longer perform that role. But here is what is also true. The people who stay, those who can meet you in your wholeness rather than your constant apology, those who can see your worth even when you set boundaries, even when you say no, even when you make mistakes without collapsing into abject apologies, those are the relationships worth keeping. Those are the relationships that can truly nourish you rather than drain you. And yes, it takes courage to let people go. It takes courage to trust that the love which requires your erasure isn't really love at all. There is a powerful concept in trauma therapy, especially in schema therapy and attachment work, called reparenting. It is the process by which you become for yourself the parent you needed but never had. You give yourself the safety, validation, unconditional compassion that should have been your birthright but wasn't. For people who chronically take on blame, reparenting means something very specific. Learning to offer yourself the same compassion, the same patience, the same benefit of the doubt that you have never given to anyone but others. This means speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a child you love deeply, with gentleness when you make mistakes, with patience when you are learning, with the fundamental understanding that imperfection is not a moral failure, but simply a basic condition of human existence. This means recognizing that the child within you, the one who learned to take on blame as a brilliant but heartbreaking survival strategy, deserves recognition for their resilience, not more criticism, not more shame, not more accusations of being too sensitive or too difficult. One of the deepest and most liberating changes that can occur in this healing process is when you truly, deeply, at a cellular level, begin to understand this truth. Other people's emotions are not your responsibility to manage. Read this sentence again. Let it really sink in. Other people's emotions are not your responsibility to manage. This does not mean becoming cold, insensitive, or indifferent to others' suffering. It does not mean that you shouldn't care when the people you love are hurt. It means finally recognizing the crucial difference between empathy and enmeshment. Empathy says, I see your pain, I acknowledge it. I am here with you in this. Tell me how I can support you. Enmeshment says, your pain is my pain. Your misfortune is my fault. I must fix it immediately or I have failed as a person. The first creates a real connection, intimacy, mutual support. The second creates exhaustion, resentment, and paradoxically destroys the very connection it tries to maintain. And if you have spent your whole life in enmeshment, learning to establish this boundary will feel like a betrayal at first. It will feel like selfishness, like you're abandoning people when they need you. But you are not abandoning them. You're simply reclaiming the energy, the emotional resources you need to support your own life. You recognize that you cannot give from an empty well. Sacrificing yourself again and again until there is nothing left actually does no good for anyone, neither for you nor for the people you love. This boundary, this separation between your experience and theirs, is not a wall. It is a bridge. It is what makes real connection possible. There is also a grief that inevitably comes with this awareness, a deep and legitimate grief that is important to honor. A grief for all the years you spent apologizing, for all the relationships where you became so small that you practically disappeared, for all the moments when you could have spoken your truth, defended your needs, expressed your real feelings, but you didn't because you were too busy managing someone else's reaction, preventing their discomfort, maintaining a false peace. This grief is valid and real. It deserves space, time, recognition. And a crucial part of healing is allowing yourself to feel it fully, without immediately jumping to, "I should have gotten past this by now," without turning your grief into yet another thing for which you blame yourself. You're allowed to mourn the versions of yourself that you had to abandon to survive, the authentic you who was put aside, the you who had needs but learned to hide them, the you who deserved protection but ended up protecting everyone except yourself. You're allowed to be angry, really angry, at the systems, the people, the circumstances that taught you that your worth was negotiable, that your existence required constant apologies, that love was something you had to earn through impossible perfection, rather than something that already belonged to you. But here is what you must understand, what you must truly, deeply internalize until it becomes as fundamental as your own breathing. You have never been the problem. Never. Not once. The chaos you tried so desperately to control was never about you. The anger that filled your childhood home belonged to the adults who didn't know how to handle it. The unpredictability that made you hypervigilant came from their inability to regulate, not your flaws. The emotional instability that taught you to walk on eggshells was their responsibility, not yours. None of this, absolutely none of it, was your fault. You were a child, a small human being with a developing brain trying to make sense of an environment that fundamentally made no sense. And you did exactly what any intelligent, sensitive, and resilient person would do in that situation. You found a pattern that seemed to give you some control and you followed it, even when that pattern meant betraying yourself, even when it meant burying your own needs, even when it meant carrying guilt that belonged to other people. You did it because it was the only way you knew to stay safe, to stay connected, to survive. And that part of you deserves recognition, honor, compassion, not more blame. And now, as an adult with a fully developed brain and the ability to choose consciously, you find yourself at a crossroads, a point of decision. You can continue to follow that old pattern, continue to absorb blame, continue to apologize for existing, continue to make yourself small so others can be comfortable. It's familiar, it's what you know. And there is a certain comfort in this familiarity even when it destroys you. Or you can begin, slowly, gently, with many false starts and setbacks, the hard but necessary work of rewriting that story. Not by pretending the past didn't happen, not by minimizing the pain or rationalizing the dysfunction, but by recognizing with painful clarity that the survival strategies that once kept you safe now keep you trapped, that the reflexes that protected you in childhood now prevent you from experiencing the kind of authentic connection, mutually nourishing relationships that you truly deserve. This is not easy work. It's not quick work. But it is the most important work you will ever do. The truth you must finally accept is that you have carried guilt that belongs to other people, to broken systems, to circumstances beyond your control, to generations of unresolved wounds passed down like toxic legacies. And you have carried it with such devotion, such meticulousness, such a sense of duty that you have completely forgotten it was never yours to begin with. You have carried their burden so long you don't even remember what it looks like to walk without that weight on your shoulders. but imagine just for a moment what it would be like to put it down, even just for a second, even just to see what your life would look like without it. You will feel something you may not have felt in a very, very long time: lightness. Not the absence of weight in the sense of superficiality or irresponsibility, but the presence of possibility, the space to breathe deeply, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, you're allowed to exist without excuses, without justifications, without the exhausting and constant vigilance of someone always waiting to be blamed for the next thing that goes wrong. This does not mean you will never apologize again. It does not mean you will become someone who cannot take responsibility or recognize when you have truly hurt someone. Authentic apologies are healthy, necessary, an important part of human relationships, but what it means is that you will finally learn to distinguish between responsibility and self-erasure, between taking responsibility for your own actions and thoughts and feelings, and taking responsibility for the entire emotional economy of every person you meet. It means developing the ability to say "I'm sorry" when it's really true, when you really have done something wrong, and to say gently but firmly "this is not mine to carry" when it's not. And this distinction, as simple as it might seem from the outside, is absolutely revolutionary for someone who has spent their whole life unable to tell the difference, who has been conditioned to believe that every time someone is upset, it's automatically their fault. Learning to make this distinction is like learning a new language. At first, it's awkward, uncomfortable, you constantly make mistakes, but with practice, with time, it becomes more natural, and eventually it becomes second nature. The journey from chronic self-blame to authentic self-compassion is not linear at all. There is no straight line from here to healed. There will be days, many days, when you fall back into old patterns, when an excuse slips out of your mouth before you even realize what's happening, when you find yourself taking responsibility for things that absolutely have nothing to do with you. And that's okay. It's not a failure. It's not proof that you aren't healing, or that you're stuck, or that all this work is useless. It's simply the reality of rewiring decades, sometimes a whole lifetime, of deep conditioning. What matters is not that you are perfect. It's not that you never fall back into old patterns. What matters is that you notice it, that you pause, even if it's after the fact, that you gently redirect yourself with compassion toward the truth. You are not responsible for the constant emotional comfort of every person you meet. You are not the source of all problems. You do not have to apologize for existing, for breathing, for taking up space, for having needs, for being human. And slowly, so slowly that you might not even notice it at first, something will begin to change. You will have a conversation where someone is upset and you will not automatically assume it is your fault. You will make a mistake, a real mistake, and feel appropriate regret without drowning completely in shame and self-flagellation. You will set a boundary, you will say no to something, and you will survive the discomfort of someone's disappointment without collapsing, without rushing to fix their feelings, without immediately taking back your no. And each of these moments, as small as they may seem, is proof that you are healing, that you are learning to trust yourself again, that you are reclaiming the parts of you that have been buried under years, decades of unnecessary guilt. These are victories, real victories, even if no one else sees them, even if no one else acknowledges them, you know, and that counts. There is a strength that emerges when you stop taking on the blame for everything. Not the strength of hardness or indifference or becoming someone who no longer cares, but the strength of clarity, of knowing where you end and where other people begin, of understanding that real love does not require self-betrayal, that authentic connection is not only possible but much deeper without self-erasure, that you can be loved for who you really are, limits and all, not for who you pretend to be. And this strength, gained through years of patient unlearning, through countless moments of choosing yourself when every old instinct screamed to make yourself smaller, this strength is authentically yours. It cannot be taken from you, because you did not fight for it aggressively. You did not wrest it from someone else. You claimed it gently, firmly, patiently, with the same tenderness you have always so freely given to everyone but yourself. So if you're sitting here right now and you recognize yourself in these words, if you feel the weight of all the apologies you never needed to make, if you are exhausted, deeply exhausted, from carrying a responsibility that was never yours, please hear this. This is the moment. This is your moment. The moment to start putting it down. The moment to stop running guilt as a way to earn, beg, bargain for love. The moment to truly understand, really understand, that you have always been worthy. Even in your mess, even in your mistakes, even in the moments when you couldn't fix everything and everyone around you, you have always been worthy of love, respect, kindness, patience. The fact that no one told you this in a way you could really hear it. The fact that you had to learn the complete opposite. That is heartbreaking. That is unfair. That is devastating, but it is not permanent. It is not who you are, it is what happened to you. And there is a huge difference between the two. Because now, in this moment, you can become the voice you have always needed to hear. The voice that says firmly and softly, "You are not responsible for this. This is not your fault. You do not have to apologize for existing, for breathing, for taking up space. You're allowed to have needs. You're allowed to set boundaries. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to be imperfect. You're allowed to be human." And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone asks you why you are apologizing, you will pause. You will feel that old familiar reflex, that strong pull to smooth everything over, to make everything comfortable, to make yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. But this time, you will take a conscious breath. You will remember that you are no longer 7 years old. You're no longer that child trapped in chaos they can neither understand nor control. You are no longer responsible for managing everyone's emotions just to earn the fundamental right to exist without punishment. And instead of letting the excuse slip out automatically, you might simply say nothing. You will let the moment pass without filling the silence. You will allow yourself to be imperfect without immediately narrating your inadequacy, without rushing to explain or justify yourself. And in this silence, in this small act of quiet resistance, you will discover something profound. You're still here. You're still whole. You're still worthy of love and belonging, even without the excuse, especially without the excuse. That is where true healing lives, not in big dramatic moments of transformation, not in spectacular revelations, but in the quiet refusal, moment by moment, to betray yourself once more, in the gentle but unwavering insistence that you matter, that your needs are valid, that you're allowed to exist without constantly justifying your existence. And although the journey is long, although unlearning is difficult and uncomfortable and sometimes painful, you are already on the path. The fact that you are questioning the pattern now, the fact that you are reading these words and feeling something move, change, open within you that is already healing, that is already the beginning of coming back to yourself. And this coming home, as slow as it may be, as uncertain as it may sometimes seem, is the most important, the most sacred journey you will ever undertake. Not because it makes you perfect or flawless or incapable of making mistakes, but because it ultimately, finally, makes you free.